The world stopped at the height of the pandemic. Streets were empty, and people hunkered down in their homes, filled with fear and uncertainty. Much of that time was a waiting game, waiting for a cure and waiting for a return to normalcy. It was an unnerving time, and the promise of what the next day would bring was never certain, much less mundane. However, many people used their art form to create work, some of which spoke directly to their experiences with the pandemic, while others used that time to explore how that event served as a transitional point in their lives. That's the case with Mikko Takkunen, who lived in Hong Kong and worked as a photo editor for the New York Times. As the city slowly emerged from the pandemic, it faced conflicts on the streets as citizens demonstrated against political changes directed from mainland China. The photographs Mikko created during this time didn't focus on the pandemic or the demonstrations, but they were informed by what he experienced there as he looked upon that city. Instead, he created images that reflected his relationship with a place he would soon leave. His book is a love letter to a city and a special period in his and his family's life. This is Ibarionex, and welcome back to the Candid Frame. Well, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. I found the podcast on I don't know, Apple Podcast or somewhere, and then I was like, listen to some of the episodes, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. There's a couple other photo podcasts too that I listen to, and it's always like I like when I'm out and about with my camera. Often I listen to music or listen to podcasts, and it's like it gives a I don't know. It gives us kind of certain inspiration listening to other photographers talk about their practice and how they go about making it.
Yeah, which is the reason why I started it, because I was curious, and then this gave me permission to reach out to people and ask them questions about their process. And ask them questions I wasn't seeing being asked by others.
Yeah,
which at the time was largely in print magazines where I was working at the time. And even when I did interview someone, there was always like a limited, word count in terms of what you can write about. And, the editors wanted certain points hit. Yeah. So I couldn't indulge myself as much as I would have liked to. But now with the podcast, I can do just that.
You can ask what you want.
Yeah. But thanks for reaching out. I have to say that when I got the book and I looked through it, one of the things that really impressed me is how well it's edited and sequenced. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. I put a lot of effort into that, and actually, there's been a couple of reviews about the book in some places, and it's been nice to read some of the comments on the individual images, but nobody's really so far commented on the editing, which I put a tremendous amount of effort and thought and time, and so it's nice that you noticed that.
Oh my God, yeah, the pictures are wonderful, but the editing and sequence, my jaw just dropped at how well it was, because it just had a nice, lovely rhythm and a pace to it. And just the way when I would turn the page, it looked like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Oh yeah, I get it. And it was just, it's wonderful because I don't often see that, as well designed as a lot of books are. And I buy way too many books. Yeah. But especially for a first book, to be as well edited and sequenced is quite the accomplishment. So kudos to you. But I can't help but think that your work, not just as a photographer but as a photo editor, played a big role in you being able to do it as effectively as you did. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I would like to think so. I mean that's what I do as my job. I assign photography, send photographers an assignment, and then I select the images for the for the stories, but and then a lot of that is obviously then when it's something more visual, it's actually more visual stories that get a lot of images. Then it's putting them in the right sequence, and I've been doing that now for 10, 12 years or so. and so I guess I picked certain skills. But I mean, it's definitely. I mean, I know that a lot of photographers aren't the best editors of their own work, and I was kind of wondering if I can edit my own work. But then I thought if I'm kind of doing that as my day job, I should try to edit my own work, and I had a certain vision how it should be done. I mean, there's definitely one or two things in the book that kind of bug me, and I would, if I would ever do a second edition, I would change. But I guess you can't get everything exactly right, and
at some point you gotta close it and send it off, because otherwise you'll never finish it, because there'll always be one more thing. I was the fact that you said that you kind of did that pretty much on your own is interesting, because one of the things I wanted to ask you is whether you had hired or collaborated with a designer.
No, so the sequence is completely mine. I did show it to my wife, who is also photographer and a photo editor, and she kind of flagged 13 images that she thought should come out, or I should consider taking out from the whole. And actually, I took 12 out of 12 of her 13 suggestions out. So she had that say, but other than that, it's all the entire sequence is mine, and the final selection. That I did work with the designer on how to present the sequence in the book, but the actual what images were picked and in what order, that's kind of completely mine.
Yeah. It's an interesting discussion to have with photographers, especially now in the age of Instagram, where everything is about the singular photograph, and to think about a collection, a body of work, whether in the form of a book or a portfolio, or the way you see images on a website. And I think it always has to sort of start with, well, what are the images about? Yes, they're visually beautiful or pleasing and well composed, all those things that quantify what a good photograph is. But ultimately, it's about, well, what is this work about? Yeah. So when you started looking at this work that you'd been producing in Hong Kong, what was your thought in terms of answering that question for yourself before you sat down and started, pulling images and figuring out which ones would go together? In terms of what is this?
Well, I mean, I guess the photojournalist in me is still kind of grappling with the fact that what does this work mean, and what am I trying to say? And I don't know if I'm really trying to say something specific. All I know is that when I started making the images in the beginning of 2020, it was just out of this kind of seeking some sort of relief from the pandemic, but also the eagerness to capture Hong Kong, because I knew that at that point I thought we would be leaving Hong Kong possibly in a matter of a couple of months, and then which ultimately turned into 18 months because of the pandemic restrictions. We couldn't make our transfer from Hong Kong to New York earlier. That we actually, which in the end was a lucky stroke, that I had these 18 months to kind of keep working on the images. And I guess it was like possibly something around six months into doing that work, I started having that thought of maybe this could actually become a book. And then towards the last 12 months there, I was really kind of working towards that goal. But what in terms of like talking about meaning, I guess, and as my job at the New York Times, I'm always dealing with images that are about something, whether it's Rohingya crisis or whatever stories I'm working on. But a lot of the work that I had been looking at or on my free time, like people like Saul Leider and Ernst Haas and a lot of the New York school photographers, I felt like a lot of their work was, it would have been, they were just capturing things kind of anew. I love that there's like this Ernst Haas quote that is like, I'm not interested in seeing new things. I'm interested in seeing things anew. That you just like kind of try to see things try to be kind of surprised by the ordinary and trying to see things in a fresh way and I certainly don't think that my photographs are any kind of travel photography about New York. About Hong Kong. I wouldn't want them to see like that. But I think it's okay to see beauty, and I think there's also like having a sense of beauty in photographs. It's fine. That's one meaning, or that's fine. gives a sense of meaning. But like I think it was kind of my farewell letter to Hong Kong in some ways, knowing that I would be going and capturing the city that was very much changing at the time. 2019, there were these months-long protests that I covered as a photo editor, on a daily basis, and those kind of died down in the beginning of 2020 when the pandemic started to hit, and then in the early months of 2020 I was sent home. So basically, I lost my trail, like I mentioned at the end of the book, that I lost my kind of daily tram rides to the office, and I started working from home, and first literally taking a lot of photographs from my 19th floor bedroom window on the rooftops above, and then finally ended up like roaming the streets at night, and eventually because we couldn't leave Hong Kong at the time at all, and whenever I had a vacation, I would then use my vacations to walk around Hong Kong or move around on the tram or the ferry or so on. That in the end, I only started to edit the book a year after we had come back to New York, and when I started going through everything that I had taken thousands of images, and I just knew that I wanted to put that work together in a book form, and then I started to narrow it down, the edit from thousands to hundreds to dozens and so on, and I didn't really worry too much about what is the meaning. I just knew that I like these images, and they meant something to me, and I wanted to put them in a sequence. What I kind of started thinking as a journey through Hong Kong. It's not like a travel photography book about Hong Kong, but it's my own kind of journey about places that I captured and where I went, and I was recently reading a review about one of Friedlander's books that I think one of the Coen brothers edited, and the director Coen said that he has always thought that the artist's job is to make the work, and then it's the critics or others' job to kind of interpret it. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily, and I like that. Maybe it's like an easy way out, but in some ways, the work definitely means a lot to me, and I hope that it resonates with others, and I imagine that it would resonate differently to people who might be Hong Kongers, and I know that it had resonated with some of my friends who also left Hong Kong around the time I left, and then obviously there are people who've never been to Hong Kong, and this is kind of they kind of only got to know Hong Kong. Probably everybody has certain picture of Hong Kong, but hopefully even if they haven't lived there, but if they kind of discover through Hong Kong through my images, hopefully it resonates in some ways. There's definitely certain things that were in my mind when I took particular images, but related to the political climate or the pandemic or so on, which, maybe the political climate, it's not really visible in the images. A pandemic, of course, is, because a lot of the images that you see are wearing a lot of the people that you see in the images are wearing masks, and that's kind of obvious visual symbol of the pandemic. But I certainly wouldn't want it to be like a pandemic book or
it doesn't come off like that at all. You reference Salt Leiter, and I can see some of the influences in some of the images in there. But when I think about Salt Leiter and his work, especially his New York, it's New York is one of the most photographed cities in the world. But when you look at Salt Leiter's photographs, that's Salt Leiter's New York.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he had a relationship with the city that really comes across in the photographs. Mm-hmm. And you made the distinction that you didn't want these photographs that you made of Hong Kong to come off as basically like the tourist photographs. And they certainly don't. But I think that to my mind, there's like a distinction in terms of shooting a city from a photojournalistic point of view. Yeah. One is a tourist point of view, and the last one is the personal point of view. And it seems like that your your images were born from that personal relationship that you had, because you photograph things there in a very sort of unique way that I think only can come from being familiar with a place, because there are scenes and there are moments that are pretty subtle, nuanced, even mundane, that if you're not really sort of in tune with the place in that way, you don't see them.
Yeah.
But the challenge for you must have been, though, in the fact that you're completely immersed in photojournalism, and there were all these events in terms of the demonstrations that were happening in Hong Kong. Was there a struggle for you with respect to the kinds of pictures you made, disconnecting from what you did for a living as an editor? You weren't working as a photographer, but still, because you're thinking about that all the time. Was there a difficulty in seeing in the way that we see exhibited in the book?
Well, I guess really the biggest question was sometimes, when I would photograph, something would caught my eye, and it's basically, there's like one image in the book about a kind of jug and a sink in a kind of outdoor street kitchen, and in a beautiful light, and there's like, the primary colors there, and I just was very drawn to it, and I would photograph it, and I think in that kind of sense, taking some of those kind of images, especially earlier on, the photojournalist in me would feel like, what is this about? What am I trying to say? But I kind of liberated myself from the need of having any kind of overt meaning, and just let myself photograph anything that caught my eye. And I like what you said about, about the personal view, and what you wrote about, what you mentioned about Saulider's, Hong Kong, Saulider's New York, that I would very much like these images to be seen as my Hong Kong, and it's very much my own personal kind of experience or my own impressions of Hong Kong, that it's not a photo essay. I mean, I don't have the peak, or I don't have a lot of the like iconic sites, the big Buddha in Lantau Island, and there's certainly a lot of I have images from and off the Star Ferry, because which is a Hong Kong icon, but I love the ferry, and it was part of my Hong Kong, and I was drawn to that, and that's why there are several images related to the Star Ferry, but I didn't feel like I need to tick certain boxes of capturing certain things and to have like a whole picture of Hong Kong. And and Hong Kong is it's a fairly small territory, but it's my images, like 90% are from the Hong Kong island, as opposed to the Kowloon side, which is the continent side. So I kind of felt free to kind of just concentrate on those areas that drew me in, but also in terms of individual images, to photograph whatever I wanted, and then worry about it later. I would often take images that I didn't even know what drew me in. I didn't necessarily even see certain beauty in them when I took them, but later on they kind of clicked, or they started to make sense to me in some way, and I would then see certain connections with other images that I had taken. When I was putting together the edit of the book, I really enjoyed the process of connecting some of these images with each other, and obviously I had no they've been taking months apart, or sometimes year apart, but then I was building this kind of puzzle of putting them together in a sequence that I hope would all kind of flow as one whole.
Yeah, that's it. You're out there and you just create. You don't think about how you're going to use it. Because I talk about the distinction between the difference between the creator, the editor, and the critic. Each of them has their own distinct role. Yeah. And where you're out there making pictures, you start putting on the editor hat or the critic hat, it's way too early. Yeah. It's just like, shut up, go to your room. I'm here to just produce the work. And then later on, when you have all the photographs and you start printing them out or looking at them on the screen and trying to figure out what does this all mean and what are the relationships, that's the point where the editor plays the role and makes those discoveries, those relationships between the images.
Absolutely. And I would say that I guess in this equation I played two of those three roles, and I was a bit worried whether I should really edit it myself, but it felt important that if I had this one certain vision that I should try to be the editor too. But the fact that I only started editing the work well over a year after I had taken the last Hong Kong picture, I think that gave me certain, distance to the work. And I think as a photographer, you often, when you look at an image, you have those certain associations to the moment that you felt like, or you saw outside the frame that don't necessarily come across in the image itself. And you might sometimes feel a bit too attached to a picture for the wrong reasons. And I think the fact that I took like well over a year to really start editing the work perhaps let me kind of let go of some of those attachments to certain pictures that maybe I thought very highly of, but then realized that maybe they weren't the keepers really.
Yeah, and it must be very interesting in terms of your role, because when you provide an assignment to a photographer and they submit images, you have to make those assessments very quickly, because there's a big time constraint between the image being created and then actually ending up in a newspaper or the magazine or online or whatever it is. You don't have this long gestation period that you can enjoy when you're creating a body of work, where you can wait, 6 months or a year to sort of return to it and not be as emotionally attached to it. But there's a purpose for in each approach, right? One is trying to get a story out in a timely basis to people, and another one is less pressing, where it isn't so much about it being timely as it is more an expression of an experience. Jeff Dyer, who does the essay, he makes an interesting point in the essay about photographs. When people often look at photographs, they think about who's in the photograph and where was it taken and when was it taken. There's all these sort of these quantifiable factors, but with other images, it's less about when and where or why, and more about the experience of the photograph and how it makes you feel. And these pictures sort of reflect that latter that latter experience.
I mean, Jeff writes something about like nothing really happens in these pictures, but which might it wouldn't be a good advertising line for a book maybe, but I kind of like the fact that I don't have caption, I don't put dates, and I only have page numbers in the book, and I would like the images to. I strive to make like a timeless images, and I would like to see them obviously stand the test of time and not be seen as just as some images that are particularly from 2020 or 2021. And I mean, when I look at Sauleiter or Ernst Haas and a lot of these heroes of mine, especially like a lot of the mid-century New York street photographers, who are very much, many of them my big inspirations, and I kind of thought Hong Kong as my own New York, and I look at their work, and it obviously there's certain elements there in the pictures, the way people are dressed or the way the cars look, and that gives them a certain time reference, but they feel timeless. They kind of reach certain quality that isn't dependent on the the exact year or even a decade when they were taken, and that's certainly my goal. I would not dare to say that to put myself on the same level as these heroes of mine, but I think that's what I strive for, and that was the goal.
And I would argue with Jeff that there's nothing happening in the photographs. I think that the moments are very quiet, and they're easy to miss because of how ordinary they are. If you talk about an image where nothing's happening, I think like Eggleston, right? Yeah. Where it's a scene and there is nothing happening. It is just about that space at that moment in time. But in your images, there is something happening, and it can be something as simple as someone's feet as they pass underneath an awning, right? But that is a moment. The fact that it's as ordinary as it is doesn't mean that nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Maybe nothing dramatic is happening, especially considering all the things that were happening in terms of the demonstrations in Hong Kong. There was a lot happening.
Yeah.
There was a lot of drama on the streets, but you didn't turn your lens to that.
No, the protests were had pretty much kind of died down by the time when I started making these images. So they weren't really there to be photographed for me anymore. But you could, I guess, argue like, why didn't I do that? The year before when everybody was out there photographing these scenes. I did go out one of the big protests and I took some pictures, but also it felt like I was trying to. Often, even when I was finally making the work seriously, I was trying to steer clear from the kind of the more obvious photographic events where, like, there was this big annual, like, a flower fair in the Victoria Park near where we lived, and a lot of photographers go there and photograph all these beautiful flowers and people interacting with them. And my wife was once, pointing out, that's happened. Do you want to go there? And I was like, I don't. I don't want to go to the obvious, and that's what I felt with but when it came to choosing any other locations where I went, I just kind of roamed around and wandered and waited for something ordinary to surprise me and trying to kind of capture something extraordinary in it, as opposed to a specific event or something like that.
There's a word that you use a couple of times in the book. And that Jeff, I think, he also uses. It's a Chinese word for, I guess, outsider. And I don't even want to feign trying to pronounce the word.
Weilo.
But Weilo. Yeah. Okay. So talk to me about your sort of self-awareness that you are sort of an outsider to this culture and this community. And what role does that play? Not so much when you're creating the images, but when you were editing and sequencing and putting in all this together, that self-awareness, does that bring a certain sensitivity to or responsibility in terms of the images that you compiled and put together in this book?
I think part of the reason why I wanted to mention that, and there's been a lot of discussion in photography, especially in photojournalism, in the past few years about diversity and the need for diversity, and who gets to tell stories about certain communities, like whether it's if in my job I deal with a lot of I cover Africa stories for the international desk at the New York Times, and I think it's important for me to work more with local photographers from those countries where we're doing stories, and I think you get like a certain perspective by not just always sending a photographer from another country, maybe perhaps from Europe or even the US to cover a certain story in whether it's whatever country it would be in the continent, and what I guess part of the reason why I wanted to mention the word Guelo and the fact that I'm an outsider is that I rarely wanted to admit it, that I didn't want to be, it's kind of a like, I admit I am an outsider, and this is what I made, and I'm not trying to tell yours, to the Hong Konger story. This is just my experience of Hong Kong, and there are a lot of great Hong Kong photographers, and they have their own perspectives and stories to tell about Hong Kong. But in a way, I wasn't trying to even represent. I wasn't trying to represent Hong Kong or trying to represent people, but it was really my impressions of the city. I think, and I would say that for me, the city itself is a bigger kind of a subject matter than its residents or I mean, definitely I'm interested in I'm from a very small town, and I've always been drawn to big cities, and I'm interested in the kind of urban environment and people and transport and skyscrapers and so on. That really draws me in. But as I said just a bit earlier, I was definitely not trying to make a photo essay. It's just like my own impressions as an outsider, which in Hong Kong, it's a different kind of Asian city. I mean, it's very cosmopolitan. There's a lot of foreigners living there. A bit less now due to some of the political changes, but I think it wasn't an environment in the same. Being a foreigner is how should I say? I mean, like the foreign population has been quite big in Hong Kong, and that's that is part of the fabric of Hong Kong, and I guess there's that colonial history of Britain and being under Britain, and half of the street names are still British as opposed to like Cantonese names, and so I don't feel like that colonial legacy and the cosmopolitan aspect of Hong Kong is big part of the place, but I didn't feel like I'm trying to tell anybody's stories apart from mine and my impressions, and I mean I certainly would hope that even perhaps Hong Kongers could see that the images would also resonate with them, and they would see something new in their own hometown through my eyes. I think there's an element of outsiders being able to see something new in a place, in the sense that I certainly feel when I go to a new town, I kind of look at partly through like a child's eye, that you see you're somewhere for the first time and you notice everything is new and you get drawn to things, and I mean that happened with me in New York too, and then obviously then you live here and you kind of think it becomes a routine and every day, and then you don't feel excited in the same way. Like when I take a lot of photographs in New York, but it's not the same experience as before, that when you get used to the place, your eye kind of sees differently. And I mean, obviously, I had lived in Hong Kong already, over 4 years or so when I started making these images more seriously. But I think the fact that I was due to the pandemic spending more time at home, working from home, and needing that release of being out on the streets. Yeah. And then that was kind of like helped me to see differently and appreciate what the city or visually to the pandemic, just because of the kind of the pandemic nature and the fact that I think it's also you appreciate things more when you kind of know you're about to lose them. And I thought that I was losing Hong Kong in the sense that I really thought that we might have left Hong Kong within within 2 or 3 months, but in the end we ended up staying for another 18 months.
Of all the places I have visited and led photography workshops, Japan was something special. It was a transformative experience that changed how I see travel and use photography to document an experience. I have been so eager to return there since 2019, and I want to offer you the opportunity to share this December in Tokyo with me. What makes this experience unique is that it's being hosted by Japanese photographer George Nabechi, who has helped create unique personal experiences revolving food, culture, and personal interactions with people who live and work in this amazing country. The title of this workshop is Embracing the Moments, because it's more than just about making photographs. It's about immersing yourself in an experience and allowing those pleasures and those feelings to shape how you see and remember a special time in your life that you'll be sharing with others. Visit nobechicreative.com for more details, including how to make scheduling and payment arrangements. If you have specific questions, email info@nobechicreative.com. The work in this book is a return to you as a photographer, because you started as a photographer and then you became a photo editor. So tell me about that journey from your initial interest as a photographer, and now you end up becoming a photo editor, especially for one of the more premier news organizations in the world.
So yeah, I mean, I studied photojournalism I first studied international relations in Scotland. I thought I would maybe end up working for like an international like an NGO or something like that. But towards the end of the international relations degree, I had started kind of taking photographs as a hobby of my friends where I was studying in Scotland, and when I would take photos when we were hiking or just out and about with friends, and it kind of turned into a more serious hobby pretty soon. But it wasn't until one of my friends showed me the documentary War Photographer about James Nathway that really made me kind of learn about photojournalism. Obviously I'd been consuming a lot of news, but I hadn't really consciously thought of the thing called photojournalism. And when I saw that documentary, I thought, this is incredible. This is like, this connects my two passions, kind of international relations and photography. And actually, when I graduated from the international relations degree in Scotland, I ended up enrolling on a photojournalism course in Wales. And after that, I worked as a press photographer in London for a couple of years, but I wasn't doing really the kind of work that really thrilled me. It was often very quick assignments. When I had been blogging about photojournalism for a couple of years on this site called Photojournalism Links that I had created, which kind of became popular among photo editors, and then when Time.com was looking for a junior photo editor to join their staff in New York, they got in touch with me and asked if I would be interested in applying, and I did, and I ended up getting the job, and then I kind of overnight made this switch from being a photographer to being a photo editor, and I felt like then I felt weird about kind of trying to play both sides, trying to be a photographer and a photo editor. So I kind of ended up selling all my gear and just trying to be, and I thought I'm just going to try to be the best photo editor I can, and kind of, and so the photographers I would work with wouldn't feel like, oh, he's trying to be a photographer too. So for many years, I was only really taking photos, of the family or my friends, and just with my iPhone. And I was, it wasn't really until 2018 that my wife gave me a rangefinder camera as a present, and I started taking some photos occasionally more seriously. That I think kind of planted the seed, or gave me a joy of like making photographs more consciously again. But it wasn't really until then that in beginning of 2020 when I started doing more seriously, when I started making these Hong Kong images, and now. Even when I was doing the work, it took me a while to really to feel comfortable saying that I am a photographer, that I'm trying to be a photographer again, and I was just making these images, and it wasn't until I had really done the edit for the book and started pitching around to publishers, and that I felt like, okay, if I'm going to do this book, I should feel comfortable actually saying to people that I'm a photographer too, and it might sound silly, but even then, even changing it to like into my Instagram profile that I'm a photographer and a photo editor, or that I felt weird that to kind of be even putting that out there for people to see. And it feels really good now to be able to do both. I love my job as a photo editor at the New York Times, but I also, take the act of making photographs has become very important for me, and I do that, here. I've continued to do that here in New York. But it also feels liberating in the sense that, the kind of images that I make on my own are in many ways a million miles away from the kind of work that I edit at the New York Times, that I kind of like, I get a tremendous sense of purpose of my editing work at the international desk due to the kind of subject matter that we edit and important stories that we share with our readers, but also it's nice just to go out with my own camera and just to be inspired by things and the world and the city that I'm in, and kind of take photographs whatever I want without having to worry too much about the meaning or what I'm trying to say. And I'm now playing. I guess I'm now playing for both teams, both the editor and the photographer side. But they also, I think they kind of complement each other, and I just because of the nature of the work I edit and the nature of the work that I do being so different, I think I feel at peace with it. I think it would be different if I would kind of trying to do photojournalism, the kind of work that I edit at the Times.
You mentioned earlier about if a photographer was, if there was an event abroad, you said a country maybe in Africa, that you would try to look for a local photographer. Yeah. In my work as a magazine editor, there were certain people in my Rolodex. I'm dating myself, but where I would pull from. But then there would be other times where it was less than obvious who I might need to reach out to in order to fulfill the needs of an article. Tell me about your process in terms of finding photographers for assignments and what you're looking for beyond obviously the competence of being able to make a good photograph.
Well, I mean, I do quite a lot of portfolio reviews. I mean, New York Times, we have an annual portfolio review. It's actually taking place again in a week. So I will attend that and see a lot of portfolios. There's a great foundry photojournalism workshop where I actually attended as a student when they first started in 2008, and since then I've been several times to the workshop making portfolio reviews. So portfolio reviews are great events to kind of find new talent, but obviously then I try to keep an eye on what other publications and our competitors, which photographers they assign, and also a lot of the wire news agencies. I think like for agencies like Agence France Presse, they use a lot of freelancers and a lot of young photographers, and I found a lot of people who have become New York Times regulars by seeing their images on the so-called wire and being impressed by them, and then actually putting them assignment. And sometimes you try them on, it doesn't work, but I try to kind of try people out on smaller assignments first, and then if it goes well, try them on something more ambitious and again bigger and bigger. And there's people who have kind of gone through the process and are now doing the biggest projects that we do on the international desk, and also they're not just being used by the international desk, but they become kind of New York Times regulars, in the sense that the business desk or the science desk or the climate desk uses them, and it feels good that kind of like having noticed a photographer and then having given them their first assignment, and then years later they're in this position to do work that it can sometimes take months and months to produce. But in terms of what do I look in the photographers, in the young photographers I look, obviously I want to see interest in current affairs, interest in journalism, and I mean there's all different sorts of photography. There's travel photography, there's portrait photography, there's fashion photography and so on, which are all valid forms of photography, but they're not the kind of work that I'm really looking for. I'm looking for people who are obviously kind of capturing news or current affairs or issues, and it doesn't have to be work that is necessarily done on assignment. I think a lot of people do so-called self-assigned work, personal projects, and those I think are a great way of really honing your skills and doing something meaningful, because you're not strained by time, and especially if you work on a project in your hometown, you can, wherever you live, you can spend, months or years on a single subject matter, because you can visit it easily over a long period of time. And I mean, there's a lot of photographers who I think have been smart in really doing these personal projects and kind of using those as calling cards to go to the editor and this is what I can do. But obviously you have to be also, I need to be able to see a good eye, a sense of composition and all those kind of technical qualities. But also to the nature of the work that we do, I need to get a sense of integrity and honesty and ethical standards that if I'm sending a photographer to cover somebody or situation that it can be quite sensitive, and often are, that there are people that can represent the New York Times, and I know that, and I have to be able to rely on them, acting in the correct manner and so on. So there's when it comes to photojournalism, there's all these kind of extra qualities that you need beyond just the quality of being able to make a strong picture.
Yeah, you talk about the idea of giving someone an assignment and getting something back, and I think there's an important distinction between someone who gets something in on deadline that adequately fulfills the requirements of the assignment, and then there's the other person that brings something in that you couldn't have anticipated and expected, that just makes it even better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
and that's, I think, what every photo editor really sort of hopes for, is a photographer that will be able to give them that sort of that factor. And it's hard to quantify what it is, because it's going to be different for each photographer. But I'm curious to hear if you have an anecdote about a particular photographer where that was your experience with them.
It's interesting, going back to what you just said. There's the kind of element of sometimes like kind of ticking the boxes, like you're on a tight deadline and you just need the photograph, and you're just happy to kind of get whatever you want. I mean, as long as you kind of get an image that you can put on the story. But then there's that when we do so-called enterprise stories or feature stories, that we we plan ahead, and they're not like going out, they do not go like they don't get published right away, and we can kind of plan ahead and see what is the visual potential in a story, and then and we can kind of map out how much resources and time and we're willing to invest in it. Then that's where it gets really fun, because then you're like, who is the best person to do it, and what this photographer might do as opposed to the other. But like one of the big projects that I was involved with last year, I've been covering Afghanistan for the New York Times for many years, and we did a big project. We had a couple of photographers that we worked with for many years in Afghanistan, and then there was the fall of Kabul in August 2021, and a lot of photographers moved out. But year after, my manager asked me that we should kind of come up with some strong visuals project to do on Afghanistan, to see kind of how is the country year after the fall of Kabul and the U.S. forces leaving the country. And I was talking with photographer Kiana Hayeri, who had already worked with us for many years, about potential subject matters, and my manager has already thought that maybe we could do something concentrating on women. And then I was talking with Kiana kind of over the phone, like what could we do, and could we do like, I don't know, some sort of big photo essay in different parts of Afghanistan, and how women are in year or so after the fall of Kabul, and then Kiana told me pretty much straight, like, I don't think it's possible to kind of like just photograph women or spend a ton of time with them, just because it outsiders' presence draws attention, and it could put them on a harm's way, and then what we so it basically meaning that it would be difficult to kind of do observational work, so what Kiana suggested, that we should do like really concentrate on portraits, and we really kind of like we settled on that idea pretty fast, and we mapped out kind of like, okay, we want to have a big body of work on Afghan women, but how do we and we wanted to map out women from different backgrounds in the country, both in terms of ages and backgrounds and so on, and the fact that Kiana had lived in Afghanistan for many years. She's an Iranian photographer who grew up in Canada, but she had lived in Afghanistan for many years. So the fact that she had this experience in Afghanistan, or from Afghanistan, having lived there, she could really map out with us, like, where should we go? We should, obviously photograph women in Kabul, but also in Kandahar, or people in, women in Wardak, where actually there's, women, families who were supportive of Taliban taking over, but also the fact that she, as a woman, could do these portraits. Most of them she worked with fixers, but she it was obvious that if we want to do a portrait project about Afghan women, it would have to be a female photographer, because she could visit these women on her own, but also the fact that she knew kind of where should we go, how to do it, and also like to find that we discussed a certain visual language, that how do we bring it all together, and we decided let's do it in we usually, she works in 3x2, with the traditional 35mm frame, but we decided let's we're trying to do something different, so we settled on a square format approach, but also she had these ideas of like using, it was obvious that there would be a lot of women that we couldn't we wouldn't be able to show their faces, or we would somehow, so she used all these devices to kind of hide some of their identity, whether it was curtains or windows or shadows and so on, but it's really remarkable if the listeners of this podcast want to go and find it on our website. It's like this, how consistent it was that what she was able to do. She photographed 96 women, and I think we published around 40 on our website, and then we published it as a 40-page special section with one of the Sunday issues of the newspaper here in the US, and it's a work that I'm incredibly proud of. One of the, in my 8 years, one of the biggest projects in my 8 years at the Times, for which I was that I've been involved with, and I'm very impressed, the amount of resources New York Times was willing to put on it, and how we, both work with, our digital designers, how to make a completely unique like digital presentation, but then work with our print designers to make this, 40-page special section, which is kind of unheard of when you think about it, and when you think in the state of print media in the US and throughout the world, really, that we could do something like that. But I think there's a long way of answering your question, is that it's just that I think you need these people when it comes to those biggest projects. You want to be working with people who really have the experience. The eye, obviously, Kiana had showed that to me, but also her experience of living Afghanistan, and then her smart in finding the best approach for this particular project. And even though the original ask came from my manager, Gaia Tripoli, like, we want to do a photo project on Afghanistan, and I would ideally want to do something on women, but it was kind of like then from our conversations with Kiana that it all really kind of started, and I think it came out beautifully, and the fact that I should also mention that she interviewed these people, so we ran these portraits with their names, if we were allowed to give their names, and their ages, their background, and their quotes, what they thought about their situation in Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul, so that what we, it's somewhat of a cliche to say in photojournalism that photographers are giving a voice to the people that they're covering. Mm-hmm. But I think in this case, it really felt that's what we were doing, and it really felt important and significant. And I think it's also I think I was saying earlier that I wanted to create my own Hong Kong work to be something that stands the test of time, and I think also the work that we created with Kiana on this Afghan women project was something that I think it will be a historical record that will stand the test of time. I would like to think so anyway.
One of the big concerns now is with AI and photo manipulation. Mm-hmm. And just as of this recording, there was a big kerfuffle regarding family portrait that was released by the English royalty. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know, the Duchess, I guess. I don't keep up with them.
The Princess of Wales. Yeah, Catherine, Princess of Wales. Yeah.
Right. Catherine, yeah. Right. So, and for me, it was kind of interesting. I was less sort of caught up in the whole controversy in terms of how bad the Photoshop was, but it was just this idea that there was an assumption, because it was coming from the royals, that the images could be trusted. Yeah. Right, and that's why they weren't initially. The problem wasn't initially caught until later, right? And now with images coming, there's a certain reliability that you as a photo editor likely put into images that get transmitted by the wire or another institution. But there are so many images that are just flying through the world, especially on Instagram. And I know that a lot of institutions will see a spot news event that someone with a camera phone has shot.
Yeah.
That there was no photojournalist there to create an image and that has the ethics, all of that you normally associate with a professional photojournalist. And I'm really curious to hear in terms of from where you sit, when an event like that happens and you're seeing images come through, what are some of the things that you have to consider in terms of making the choice to print a photograph, especially with timeliness being such a factor?
Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely, when something, for instance, recently we had a couple of weeks ago we had the terrorist attack in Moscow, and one of the first images, usually from an event like that, are maybe like images that people have posted on social media that then the news agencies are sharing to their clients. Obviously, then you have to be really on the watch. Whether that's something that you can trust. And I mean, we sometimes use those images, but it's kind of like you kind of try to confirm it by multiple sources and see that if this is if Reuters is uploading an image from the Moscow attack, the account reaches us, that is that something that we're willing to use. But we try to be very, very careful with those. And just because a news agency uploads something, that certainly doesn't mean that you should just use it. And the same goes with, obviously, a lot of news agencies, they also share images from state media, and especially when it comes to Russia too. A lot of the images that we see from the Kremlin are from Russian state media, and we have to often, if there's no other source and we want to use an image of President Vladimir Putin, we would mention in the caption, not just in the credit, but we will actually mention in the caption that where does it this is a photograph released by the Russian state media of President Putin in the Kremlin on Tuesday or whatever. Obviously we first of all, we do want to still have to be confident that the image shows what it says, but we also, I think we owe it to our readers to really spell it out where it originates from. The same goes for these social media images, that if we use something, that we don't just like put it up, but we will also kind of signify that this is an image from social media, that is not by a professional photojournalist, or it's not an image made by us. But certainly I would say that in the internet and this need for speed, certainly it's an added pressure. But I think you have to be fast, but more importantly, you have to be right, and right becomes before being fast. So that's how I kind of see it.
Kathy Ryan, the famed photo editor for the New York Times Magazine, announced her retirement. I think just this week. Yeah. And so you've had the opportunity to work alongside some really amazing photo editors, as well as photographers. But what have you learned makes for a really good photo editor?
What makes a really good photo editor? I mean, Kathy is obviously a legend. The New York Times Magazine has its own photo department, so I haven't had the privilege to work with her or her colleagues, and I mean all of what she has done with the magazine, both in terms of photojournalism and whatever they take on, whether it's still lives or portraits. It's just really remarkable, and it'll be a big loss for her to retire. But I'm also eager to see what she does with her camera, because I really love what she's done before with the Office Romance, her first book. To your question about what makes a great photo editor, I think I think you have to. I think there's a lot of those same elements as being a good photographer. I think you have to have a good eye, and kind of know what the elements that make a good single image. Kind of obvious thing to say, but like I think. But then what really I think distinguishes to make the best out of a material that get something strong out of material that isn't obviously so. Like what I mean is that you might get a set of images from a story, and it's like you first look at it and you might think like, this is do I have anything here, or it's just ton of pictures and I'm not really getting it, seeing many highlights here. But then when you start narrowing it down and you really kind of take your time with it, and then actually you might end up with like a photo essay of 12 to 15 great images, just because you kind of taking the time to really go through it properly and consider the images. And then whenever that happens with me, I feel like I've really kind of made an impact here that I think in the hands of some other editors, they might just kind of pick half a dozen of their favorites and be done with it, whereas actually with more consideration there was actually more to work with than you first imagined. So if you sign a great portrait photographer, I mean, I don't work a lot with portraiture, but I think it's I would imagine that you assign somebody like Nadav Kander, or Annie Leibovitz, you're pretty. I mean, can you go really truly wrong? I mean, I guess the big decision is like obviously to choose the right person for the job, and for the work that the story or the portrait you want to see. But also you cannot kind of completely screw up by having a famous well-respected talent on it. But then and then you just kind of pick your favorites out of the image that they file. But I guess great photo editors are also, I think they're courageous to see new talent. And I think there's, when I started out, I might have kind of relied upon the photographers that a lot of my colleagues were using. And it maybe took a bit of time and a bit of experience and confidence to be like, look, I think actually there might be somebody better. We've been using this person in this country for a long time. Well, a lot of us started, but we can try somebody else new and give us a chance to somebody else. And then, and sometimes it's really worked out and they've done a great job and they become regulars. And so it's a sense of confidence and willingness to try out new people, and then also kind of mentor them on and if you put somebody on for the first time on a small story, in a way it's less of a risk in the sense that the story is not big, so if it doesn't quite work out, it's not going to be a big loss. But at the same time, obviously it's difficult for the photographer to really impress you, so you kind of have to realize too that what the material they were working with was, if they only had a day on something and the access was poor, what can you really expect? But I try to kind of, I think the experience that I've been a photographer, I know I always kind of think I try to respect the circumstances under which they make the images, that there are events where you would see images everywhere, and I would really expect to get a ton of strong images, but then there are for the journalism we often have to deal with access issues, and you can't choose the weather, you can't choose the sunset or the golden hour or to take your images because it happens now in the middle of the day and under the harsh sun or the raining clouds, that you can't, you have to make the images when they happen, and that I often try to put myself in the shoes of the photographer and think like, okay, what was looking at this set and the circumstances or environment where they made these images, could they have done better, or was it just a matter like they just didn't have the access, and this is actually really good considering the environment or the circumstances that they were working in.
Yeah. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore on their own. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
I'm going to name here another photographer that I worked a bit. She's called Hannah Reyes Morales. She's a Filipino photographer, currently based in Paris. I recently worked with her on a big project that we did on African youth. She traveled across several countries in the continent and really produced an incredible body of work, even though she hadn't worked in the continent many times before. And she's one of those, I think she's I'd say still a young talent who I think was already producing work at a very high level, but I think will be really one of the, I could see really the big names of the photojournalism world for years to come. And if you don't know her work, look it up and follow her on. And I think she's making really great photojournalistic work, and I think you'd enjoy seeing her work.
Yeah, and I had the pleasure of interviewing her early in her career. I can't remember how long ago. I think it's 5 or 7 years ago. So if people want to look in the archive, they'll be able to listen to an early conversation with her. But thank you so much, man. It was a real pleasure to have a chance to talk with you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks to Mikko for joining us. You can learn more about Mikko and his work by visiting mikkotakkunen.com. And if you're a fan of our work, you can write reviews on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts and share a favorite episode on social networks, be it X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Remember to use the hashtag #TheCandidFrame. You can also support us financially via Patreon. And if you want to make a one-time donation to the show, you can do so now by visiting buymeacoffee.com/TheCandidFrame. Thanks to Bill Broussard, Neely Drown, W. Shambas, and J.L. Cohen for their recent contributions. We've relaunched our newsletter using Substack. Sign up today and receive regular updates on all things related to TCF. You'll also find a thriving photo community there that I'm really enjoying. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And this is Ibarionex, and this is The Candid Frame.